day 984. So today I want to talk about the importance of exercise order, specifically exercise order in regards to strength and hypertrophy desired outcomes. Now, exercise order conceptually isn't that complex. It is as described on the tin, essentially the order in which you perform given movements or exercises in a training session. However, like the grander concept of order of operations, depending on what your desired outcome is, the order in which you perform those movements might affect that outcome positively or negatively. Let me explain. To get it out of the way real quick, and this is an entirely separate video, but for sport specificity, any kind of technique related work that requires a high degree of mental focus and or anything that is max speed, max explosiveness, essentially requiring a fast rate of force development or a lot of velocity, you're going to want to put those things on the front end of your program where you have the maximum amount of capacities, both physical and mental, to utilize to that effort. And that's why, for example, most of the training that you see me do here on this channel is, while at a decent intensity, sub-maximal, because there's just no possible way, first thing in the morning, on an empty stomach, after conditioning, I could put forth a true 1 RM effort in anything. But that's by design, because those things aren't sustainable. That's why in a standard seasonal or periodization model, depending on the sport, you have a peaking or a testing period after an off-season, a preseason, and then a ramp-up progress where intensity goes up, volume goes down, you focus on recovery means, and then you test, reassess, rinse, and repeat. So with that all out of the way, let's say you're just the average gym goer and you want to work your chest. What do you do first? If you have 3 exercises, like you have bench press, you have triceps extensions, and then you have push-ups, let's say. Generally speaking, if you're looking for the best intersection of strength and hypertrophy, you probably want to start with your bigger, heavier, more intense compound movements like your bench press first, then your secondary movements that also hit a wide variety of muscle groups. So in this case, the push-ups, and then finish off with your single joint isolation movements, the triceps extensions. Why do you want to do this? Because the bench press is going to require the most amount of skill, and by skill I mean intermuscular coordination. It's also the most amenable to loading when you're fresh and have the most reserves available to put forth towards that effort. And dovetailing off of that, it's also the activity that will suffer the worst as you become more fatigued. In other words, if you were to rearrange the 3 activities that we previously mentioned, so bench press, tricep pushdown, and push-ups, if you were to do the pushdowns or push-ups first, that would either, in the case of push-ups, pre-fatigue the movement pattern that you're going to do on the bench press, and in the case of the triceps pushdowns, you would pre-fatigue specific individual, smaller, weaker muscle groups that you need for the movement pattern that is the bench press. In either way, you're setting yourself up for failure. Quite literally. Now, I picked push-ups as a second movement instead of something like chest flies, because chest flies in principle are going to operate for the purposes of this video the same way a triceps pushdown would, in the case that with flies, you're using your GH joint to leverage your pecs via the humerus without necessarily getting a large amount of tricep or deltoid involvement. So it is in effect a single joint movement, just for an arguably larger muscle group, the pecs being larger than the triceps. But in principle, I guess a better way to put it would be a chest fly, like a tricep pushdown, is an isolation movement, whereas a push-up, or a better example, the bench press, is a compound movement that evens the load distribution amongst a variety of muscles. Now, what are some cases where you might want to pre-exhaust and do the small, weaker muscle group first, and then move on to the larger, more compound movement? There's a few. If you are extremely strong, powerful, and or on anabolic assistance, it may just take a lot out of you to actually do the compound movement first, because you can do so much of it. Most of us that, can't bench more than 3 plates don't really have to worry about this. But for those of you that can, this might be a thing to consider, because even though you are capable of moving massive weights, that doesn't mean it isn't going to fatigue you non-linearly compared to your single joint isolation movements. And this definitely comes into play when discussing injury prevention. I mean, generally, the bigger and the stronger you are, the more solidly built, the more robust an organism you become. However, you can exert far more forces on your own structure by dint of the weights that you can move than most of us like small, brittle folk can do. So it's a lot easier for you to break yourself when you're very strong. An easy way to prevent this is by just making yourself less strong by fatiguing the weaker muscle groups so that you just can't move as much weight. Then injury prevention becomes kind of like a self-correcting, self-limiting thing, and you don't have to put too much effort into it. Now, the other case for doing isolation movements early is for physique sport or just personal preference. If there's a body part that you want to target for more growth stimulus over another part, like, so using the example of bench press, push-ups, and tricep pushdowns, maybe your chest grows like a weed, but you have spindly little arms, and you read somewhere triceps are like 2/3 of your arm mass, so you really want big tris, particularly that like meaty, long head, but you just want that big old horseshoe to like hang out of your sleeves. So what do? A lot of people might hit the bench really heavy and then knock out some push-ups and then, maybe do some extensions as an afterthought, or maybe do some bench press, some extensions, and then do some push-ups, a couple sets to failure, and then call it a day. But you, because you want big, meaty horseshoe triceps, you completely destroy your triceps with push-downs and overhead extensions and all this tricep-specific work. Then, because you still want to maintain your chest development, you throw in some lighter bench presses for volume at the end. In terms of weight moved, total training volume, it'll be much less, but in terms of tricep-specific growth stimulus, it'll be a ton more than if you did things in the typical biggest to smallest exercise order. So that's about it for this discussion on exercise order, folks. Again, just a real simple, basic overview. In general, as a rule of thumb, you want to front load with your highest skill, highest concentration, speed, force producing exercises first, and then on down to the single joint isolation stuff. But if there's a particular thing that you want more stimulus over another, start with that movement or muscle group so you can put the most amount of effort and intensity into it, and then finish off with the rest of your movements in such a way that it makes sense in the context of injury prevention as well as comportment with your overall training objectives. If you're enjoying my content, like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, Discord link in the description. Consistency is a superpower. Stay in the fight.